Hello, everybody. Nice. Hello, everybody. Yeah, hi, Type Brigaders. We're very honored to be here today. Like Kenneth mentioned, we've been coming to Type Brigade for a very, very long time. We never thought we'd be speaking here because we are not necessarily type designers, so it'll be an interesting talk, hopefully. Yeah, we're Zia and Kristian. We're two of the co-founders here at Zach. Arvin is our other co-founders. He's in the front row here. We also have Brett and Bella, two of our designers. We're also missing Boo and Pesto. They are at another speaking event with a rabbit tonight. I gets points with everybody. I'm Zia. I'm typically the strategic design guy at Zach. I'm a brand designer. I do creative strategy formally and officially at the company. But outside of that, I'm sort of an all-purpose designer. I do motion design. I do presentations to clients sometimes, make decks. I'm a dog dad, and I'm also the office janitor. So if you ever visit our studio and it's clean, that's all me. If it's dirty, that's nothing to do with me. As I mentioned, I'm Kristian. I'm the creative director. Honestly, within our small studio, that just means I get to boss these guys around a lot. I'm also a 3D designer, graphic designer. I'm a great personal shopper, so if you ever need a deal, hit me up. I will find you something on sale. And I also just do the bookkeeping at the company, unfortunately. We're Zach. We're a creative agency for brands at a point of change. And that basically means that we work with all sorts of companies across all sorts of industries, doing all sorts of things, but making sure that we help them communicate who they are at whatever moment of change they might end up being in at the journey that they're on as a company. That can look like a lot of different things: visual identity, strategy, art direction. The list really goes on. And to be honest, like, we're always trying to learn new things. We're a small studio. We have a passion for learning, and we're always trying to integrate new ways of working and integrating creative work into what we do, even if we're not pros at it or do it officially. Everything we do at Zach is through the lens of brand. So as a creative agency focused on brand, no matter what we're doing as a project, it's all through the lens of brand. And that includes, honestly, type as well. So that kind of leads into what we're going to talk about today, which is, we do have the concepts of a plan. A very famous idiot said this recently. And that plan is to talk to you guys about type as seen by non-type designers. So to kind of introduce this topic and what we want to talk about, we thought we would throw into somebody that we think is in the public and has interesting opinions about type to begin with. So let's play a little clip of somebody that has some type opinions.
It's different. Everybody has their own kind of font. I typed New Roman. It's classic. It's the traditional standard. It's assertive. It's professional.
So shout out Kate from Below Deck. So clearly everybody has an opinion about type in this world. We all know that. We're riddled with people who are non-type designers that use typography, whether it's to make signage for a local restaurant, to be spoofed on SNL, Below Deck people and meme makers. But then on the other side, we have, you know, the real type designers of the world, the Frudegers, Speakermans, the Atlantas, and the Luptons of the world, the people that actually know what they're doing and usually are actually invited up here, not us. But somewhere in the middle, we feel like we exist. Creative people that use type on a daily basis in our work. I'm just going to say I actually kind of like the Mexican food sign, and I would eat there personally. So we're all very familiar, I think, with this chart, this anatomy of type graph that we've probably all seen in design school, in books, and whatever else might have existed in our design education. And it covers the typical things of, you know, counters, baselines, descenders, all the stuff that type designers know, and we all have to know as designers anyway. But the way that we typically look at typography is through a different lens. We look at how it can influence iconography, how it might appear in 3D motion, how it speaks to the brand language, and honestly, that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about like maybe 3 to 4-ish sections. The first being type as image. What exactly is type as image? Type as image is obviously the low-hanging fruit of word marks, logos, whatever. I'm not going to talk about that. It can turn into full-on campaigns. It can turn on
turn into supporting elements in animation. It can be the baseline for a full-on animation. It can be illustrations, and it can be memes, of course. Why does this matter?
So one of the things we wanted to talk about with this idea of type as image is one of our favorite clients that we've worked with for a number of years, basically since we started the company, the Vancouver International Film Festival. You guys might know about this place, this organization, this festival that happens every year, but we've worked with them since 2018 on their yearly campaign, and it's really a client and a brand where we've got to explore this idea of type as image and type being at the forefront of marketing. So we'll kind of run you through a little history of what we've done for them since 2018. So for some context, when we started working with them, the brief was really to just create a unique, eye-catching visual campaign that helps them meet their objectives of growing their audiences, strengthening the VIF identity, which at the time was still relatively new. And we had a lot of assets to work with, film imagery. And what we ended up doing was creating a poster design and a set of posters that extended into a campaign that really used image as image, even though it's framed within this typographic V that comes from their word mark and is their logo. It was a really interesting way to start thinking about how to sort of promote the festival. The year after, we did the same thing, image as image. We had lots of great film assets that would get sent to us, and we just got to pick from a bunch of great photos and make something cool. And then, obviously, I think we all know what happened in 2020. Not a great time for anybody. We don't need to think about that too much. But what it really did was allow us to reframe the way that we think about what this festival could be and what it could look like. It was a festival where there were no film assets provided to us for the first time because nobody knew what films were going to come out. We didn't even know if there was going to be a festival. It was a wild time. So we thought, okay, let's try illustration as image, but still let type be in the lead to some degree. And that really kind of helped us reframe what the brief for this project to be working with them and how we could continue on into the next few years.
After that, we got a new brief. It was mostly the same, but to do the same thing without any film stills or any type of imagery. We were honestly, as a film festival, you're always thinking of the cinematic stills you're going to get, the posters and everything, and they were like, no, you don't get any of that, but still achieve the same goal. And this is honestly how we felt. For 2021, it was a bit of a different year. It was like halfway, I don't know, whatever you define it as, but halfway into COVID. They wanted to bring tourism back as part of the forefront of the festival. And so we looked at the available assets that we had. We obviously had the word mark, we had the typeface, the colors, layout styles, and the location of Vancouver. And like I said, they wanted to bring tourism back to Vancouver. So that was a big focus for 2021. 2021, we ended up here. There's Vancouver imagery. There's this kind of vertical type thing going on. Originally, this was inspired by the marquee signage that you see outside of the theater. That was the starting point, but this is the first time we really use these kind of colored blocks here that are inspired by the word mark itself, and started thinking about what can we do that is born from the word mark itself to build into the graphic identity as a whole. 2022 came around, things were feeling a bit better. VIF wanted the brand of VIF to be at the forefront of everything. We went back to the drawing board, started thinking about it in a little bit of a different way. We looked at the word mark, the typeface, and the colors. We did what you're not really supposed to do and took the logo itself, broke it apart, started layering it, broke all the rules within the brand guidelines, which we were working on anyways. And we ended up getting here. This is the first time that VIF and the way we work with VIF really appeared with type as image. Image was driving the whole idea of the campaign. It spoke back to the creative films that they show, the idea that the festival is more than just one little piece. And the response was really positive internally and externally. 2023, we kept building upon that. I think in 2023, we started to play a little bit more back to what we were doing in 2021. You can see the shapes that are both present in 2021 and 2023, both from the VIF word mark. This year was really interesting because we started to look at different angles. We started bringing in more motion. And overall, we started to figure out a way that the VIF brand campaign was becoming part of its identity at its core.
And it's kind of interesting to see this year in 2024 how we've continued to take that thinking of type as image and kind of start to blur the lines between what is type and what is image. This year we started looking at like the VIF word mark and bringing all these little tiny shapes that kind of accompany it. And even though they are not letters or they are not, type, they are born of the type. And the type is kind of in reference to the shapes are in reference to the type. And for us, this is kind of an interesting way to frame our thinking around like what is type and what is an image and where is that line drawn. And it's kind of blurry, honestly. It's kind of one of those things where you see it all bleed together and start to influence one another. And it just allows us to think about how type can become one of those things that's at the forefront, especially when you are tasked with something where you have like no image assets to use. So it's kind of interesting to see, I think, from our perspective, the lineage of the work we've done with VIF over the years. They all use image in some way. Like at the end of the day, it's an image in the middle. But in some cases, it's type as image. Some cases, it's image as image. And something else that really happened outside of this is we do a lot of work with the festival on their year-round templates, their year-round programming, and just thinking about how some of those principles of using that block shape can start to come into play into sort of like motion identities, images frame, and you kind of start to see like this more sort of internal connection between the DNA of the type in the word mark into the way that we treat things that house imagery and how those things work together overall.
This is a kind of a funny story that around the same time that we started using type as image with the campaign, we started noticing people online saying that, oh, they're putting all this money into their marketing materials. They're not putting enough money into this and that. And the funny thing is that VIF is a not-for-profit cultural organization. It starts next week, and you should all go see some movies.
Plug VIF.
All that is to say that type as image can really help define different things, visual identities, motion languages, and pretty much everything beyond. I think when you look at it, it breaks down. You can do type as iconography. You can use it as a basis for motion identities. You can use it as a basis for, how you expand upon how a logo interacts with a whole brand identity. Yeah. Cool.
Type as image. So the next thing we wanted to look at is this idea of type as texture. I think that word texture is kind of interesting and loaded as designers and creatives, and the way we think of it is maybe something more material typically. And what we want to do with type as texture is thinking of that word texture as something that's a little bit more than a material feeling. So I think when we think of the word texture, we think of like, print and paper quality and the way photos reproduce in the physical world, the way we bring sort of texture and noise and grain into illustrations or animations, or even just thinking about the way that, like the real material world exists with like concrete or wood or whatever other substrate you're kind of interacting with. But something that like we really wanted to think about is the way that texture applies to the idea of type and the way that type can become textural in the way that it creates an energy and sense of sort of atmosphere within some sort of piece or within some sort of design material itself.
One project we're going to talk about here is called Somjee. Somjee is a plant-based food company based here in Vancouver. They primarily focus right now on plant-based cheeses and butters. And when we got approached for the project, pretty much all we got was a word mark, a typeface, some colors. This is kind of what we were given. They hadn't really figured out, what they were trying to say, what they were doing with all these different pieces. And, we tweaked the logo a little bit. They wanted to keep it mostly the same, but they gave us a pretty interesting brief for this as well. They wanted to make a box for an unconventional butter. And within this space, I'm sure you're all familiar, a lot of white, a lot of green, a lot of blue. We pretty much went the opposite way and made a box that's a square. That's clearly inspired by the word mark itself, bright red, and just something completely different that would stand out on the shelves.
This is one where we really wanted to think of the role that type played in terms of like creating a sense of energy and vibe to what this piece was. When we think of this in context to the previous section, the box really becomes the image, and type kind of becomes texture. And it's not texture in the sense that we talked about before of like, grain and noise and those things. It's a bit more slick, but it is not providing a fully functional sort of use case. It is wrapping around the corner of a box. It gets cut off. It reads as the word be or or but or whatever else it might be. And you get these rhythmic things that happen when it's aligned on shelves and you put all these SKUs next to each other. It also allows for like the English and the French sides to weirdly interact in some weird ways. And something that's interesting is you also get like, depending who's stocking the shelves, hopefully you get some nice rhythmic, buts or turs. And, that kind of became a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek point for the brand, where we thought of this like rhythmic textural piece of text that was a little bit funny and a little bit like playing with what the audience expects to see in this space overall. And the client was really excited about this, and we wanted to kind of push this as part of what the sort of story of the brand was. So around this time, they started to get sort of placements in store shelves. That was a big part of like rolling out this product into the real world. And when that happened, the client started to get an email from one of the potential suppliers. This obviously has some creative liberties with the wording, but basically they said, guys, we can't have the word but all over our shelves. It's kind of rude. People won't want to shop at our stores anymore. Rejected from shelves. The client came to us and was like, maybe we have to kind of change all of our packaging because people are kind of afraid to put these on their shelves for some reason. Wow, classic type controversy. How often does that happen? So we were like, oh my God, how do we redo this whole project? We just finished it. But then something miraculous happened. We got posted on Brand New for this project, which everyone probably knows, the design blog. And they specifically praised the sort of use of having the word butter wrap around the corner of the box. And then surprise, surprise, the store emailed the client and said, we saw the Yum Yum packaging on the cool design blog. We always knew it was cool, actually. See you on shelves. So they ended up being stocked in there. I'm not going to call it what store it was, but you can all maybe make your guesses in yourself. So I think overall, like the thing that we want to emphasize here is type as texture kind of becomes part of a vibe, and it plays both a role of being textural and functional. Yes, it is saying the word butter, but it's also wrapping around the side of something in an interesting way and creating that texture and conversation with whoever's reading it. And this works across like all sorts of different ways we like to work. When type is blown up big and used in more textural ways, and how it exists sort of in a piece of signage or within a quote-unquote image, like what does the texture within that look like as type? And that can work in so many different ways, whether it's packaging, whether it's motion design, apparel, whatever else it may be. It plays a role, but it creates texture and sort of energy as well.
The last thing-ish that we're going to talk about is type is voice. Typically voice is how something sounds. If you're born in the 1900s, Chocolate Rain is pretty iconic. But typography can also be voice. It can be an energetic voice. It can be something more subtle. It can also be something super playful. At the end of the day, type expresses a tone that's relevant to what you're saying, and it also very, very much depends on who is saying it at the end of the day.
So a project that we wanted to talk about for this was another arts and culture organization that we've worked with over the years called the Vancouver Writers Fest. This was a project that I believe in 2020 we got brought in to help them with a bit of a brand refresh and visual kind of overhaul. And part of that obviously includes selecting good typography, building out a type system for them. And what really was important to us here was to understand not just what type is going to look cool and be attractive, but also who is this brand, what's their tone of voice, what do they value, what's their sort of mission and vision, who are they at their essence, and only when you kind of understand those things is when you can make informed decisions about typography and select good typefaces. So with them, we selected these two typefaces that could work together, that could kind of connect back to their mission of being both sort of about literature, but also being sort of part of the modern cultural context.
And a fun fact about Plantain is that it was one of the first typefaces created for a physical press. They use it to print books, which is originally where we got the inspiration to use it for a writer's festival.
And it's interesting to see how like these things start to come together and the role that type can play as voice when it exists again within the context of more design pieces, more sort of marketing assets, where it does have to do a lot of the heavy lifting in some ways as to what the tone of a brand can be. Even when a brand is saying something that is very straightforward and simple, like, books and ideas podcast, the way you present those words needs to be relevant to the people that are saying them. When you don't have sort of the more in-depth and sort of vision-y text that's going to be accompanying it. It also creates interesting cohesion around a brand, connecting the visual motifs that exist within maybe a logo or word mark into to words itself. So one of the projects we wanted to kind of talk about here as well is a recent project we've done for a local film production company called Kind Stranger Productions. This is the word mark or the logo mark that we made for them, based off the letter K, influenced by all sorts of things in film reels. But it has some really interesting angles and sort of visual qualities to it that we wanted to think about how we could bring into the type system overall. So thinking about, like the shape of this logo and the way that we anchor text around frames or corner out sort of typography in an image was really important to make sure that we connect the way that type feels to the visual qualities of whatever that core brand asset is. We also wanted to make sure, similar to the Writers' Fest idea, that the typefaces we chose match the tone of voice of this brand. This was, a studio that wanted to both be taken seriously and not feel too like juvenile or playful, but also be a brand that wanted to still feel friendly. Their name is literally Kind Stranger, and that's important to their values overall. So something that's interesting is like the way that you think about how you connect your type systems to the word or the logos themselves and those core brand assets allows type to play a role in communicating that visual voice as well as the emotive voice, especially when things like the logo are really small or not even present at all. Can you still create like a vibe that evokes what that logo is and connects to it visually across the board? So understanding a brand really leads to understanding their voice overall.
A big part of what we do at Zach is a lot of strategy and research, and like you just said, understanding what makes a brand, and that those things allow us to make informed decisions about the typography we actually end up choosing, which at the end represents their tone of voice. And that front end of things, which may not always seem the most interesting or connected, is actually super, super important, and something we're always thinking about in the back of our mind. And it can communicate so many things in such a simple way, whether it needs to be approachable, whether it needs to be playful or a bit more serious. Type can do a lot for leading the brand voice, and we think that's a really important thing to remember. Lastly, we're going to talk about type as brand. As we talked about at the start of this thing, all these different little pieces we look at when we're thinking about typography. Sometimes it's good to zoom out and think about the typeface as a whole, how it feels, what it does, and how it helps tell the brand of the story of the brand. Type is a part of brand storytelling. At Zach, we have this kind of matrix of brand identity that we follow. 2 buckets: creative strategy, visual identity. I won't go through it all. This all leads to the brand rolling out, and obviously typography is just like this little thing right there. Just one little thing, that's it. But in reality, type influences so many different things that we don't always think about. It influences the tone of voice that you choose. It influences the way that you speak. It obviously has to appeal to the audience, has to work with the logo, has to look good, has to work well in typography, all these things. And all of this is just to say that type affects so many pieces of brand identity, whether or not you're always thinking about it.
So I think across a lot of the work that we've done and the way that, again, we think about these 3 buckets of, type as image and type as texture and type as voice, this is sort of like, a project where you kind of employ all 3 of those principles. Type has to sort of play a large role in connecting with illustration and feel almost like it's part of that image and not just tacked on the side. It also becomes textural, but also it all comes from understanding what the voice of this brand is. At the same time, you can kind of think about the way that a word mark or a logo mark that maybe is inspired by the letter P and then turns into a cube can inspire a visual system. Like the system on the right uses all these anchored kind of frames that are inspired by that letter P. They're not type, but they come from type. And I think that's one of the things we really want to stress is that like so much comes out of type and becomes a part of everything else and vice versa. And then it even comes down to something where like you just have to understand the voice of a brand. You have to understand the intention that they have in the space they're going to exist within. If they're someone that's civic, that's going to exist in the public sphere, that has to be, you know, friendly and approachable and trustworthy. How do you select typography that feels like that, but then also typography that can inform other assets like iconography and sort of just a general graphic system and a way you approach color? So I think like the way that we really think about these things is obviously you have type as image, which informs type as texture, which informs type as voice, but it's not that linear really. It kind of goes up backwards the other way. And the voice can inform the texture, which can create the image. And sometimes these things sort of present themselves to you while you're working on a project, or even over the course, in the case of VIF, over 6 years working on something, things start to unveil themselves to you. And that's why it all becomes a part, honestly, of brand identity. It all kind of feeds into each other and just feels really connected. And even though type is just one part of that, it's all kind of this like recursive cycle of the way things help inform other things.
Hopefully that made some.
Hopefully that made some sense. And if it didn't, we'll try to clarify. So please follow us. Or don't. Yeah, it's great. But yeah, I think we have some time for questions.
There might be prizes. We might have 2 prizes. 2 prizes, yeah.
Thank you very much, Zia and Kristian. That was that was amazing. Such an awesome collection of visuals. I think maybe one of the questions will be just to like skip back to some of those slides to let people see the transitions. But like they said, we have time for a couple of questions. I think they have a couple of prizes for the first 2 questions, so you're incentivized to ask early. Nancy, wow.
I really want to know. I love the butter packaging. I'm surprised it wasn't in. Doesn't matter. It's not important.
I love the butter packaging that you did. You don't have to out who it was that was scared of it, but where can I find that packaging? And no, and second question is, beyond that issue, do you have any pushback in terms of how people responded to that packaging?
Well, it is found in Whole Foods right now, so you can get it there. It's not Whole Foods. It's not Whole Foods. We love Whole Foods.
It was in the States.
It was in the States. In terms of pushback, I think it's interesting just to like think about. I think my answer to that question is more about having a client that feels bought into the idea. Because if like a client gets afraid, or the person that is like, at the end of the day, we're the designers, we can do things that maybe are a little bit more risky and like wash our hands of it and walk away. But if the client doesn't buy into that idea, they're never gonna have the confidence to like push back against those questions that come up. And thankfully with this client specifically, they're kind of willing to go to those places. And when they got that email, they were even like, can we turn this into like a campaign? Can we do something with this? And we are working on like interesting ideas with them as to how to like make that a little brand story. So yeah, I think it just comes down to like where the client's at and like doing things that are intentionally creating controversy in a way that is like appropriate to that client. Because if they're not bought in, it doesn't matter.
And I'll just say like the way we approach projects is very process driven. We have like a way that we take clients through things. And I feel like when we were first starting our company, we would have like, the odd clients like, I need something done fast, whatever. We're new. We don't really know what we're doing. We're like, sure, let's do it. If we do that nowadays, like the result is not anything anyone's happy with. So for us, it's important to stress that like the process is what makes everybody understand why we're at where we are. And that's something that we are not willing to sacrifice. And like you said, this client we're happy enough that they were, fully bought into everything. And it's not always easy. Sometimes you have to fight with the client and, make them believe what you believe. But when they're willing to take risks, sometimes the reward is pretty interesting.
Thank you for that. I'm glad that you have an intelligent client that didn't say, hey, can you put a hyphen in that?
All right, I saw another question. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Hi there. First of all, thank you for sharing all of this knowledge. I am currently teaching marketing in Vancouver, and I'm a graphic designer also. And one of the things that the client also is always asking us to do is to make it readable, right? The client needs to be able to read. And one brand that comes to mind is Tusi. It's kind of like just a tag. So where do you guys draw the line between making it obvious and unique?
I think in the instance of like the butter packaging, they had the smaller text which said, you know, the flavor that it was. It had the actual informative text. As we said, like that was an instance to use type as texture, and you know, for many reasons outside of just, you know, readability, there's like legal reasons to do. You have to. It has to be readable, has to be legible, has to be the right size, etc. So I think it's just for us, it's about finding ways to play within the rules, because at the end of the day, you can't just print something and sell it in stores, you know, that completely throws the rules away. That's unfortunately just not possible. So it's just, to us, I think it's just about finding a way to, you know, figure out how you can kind of skirt the rules in a way that maybe doesn't upset too many people.
And I think that idea of like something being readable, like in your example, the Stussy word mark, it's like, in my perspective, that becomes, again, type as image. It becomes a shape and like a visual, not something that is readable. And that's not something that every brand can do off the outset, but like those things and that like visual recognition of an image that is based on something typographic can happen over time. And sometimes like that's just, again, like helping the client understand why if you make this move now, down the line, you'll see the payoff when people understand what it is. And I think people always try and like overanalyze something when they first see it. When you present designs, people are trying to understand what they're seeing, but design is a bit more like intuitive than that to most people, and the way that they see typographic things and logos and marks are all more about visual recognition than maybe the legibility in specific instances. And that's not always true, but like it just depends on the context of what you're creating.
Okay, yeah.
Come see us afterwards for your prize.
You get a prize.
So, hi, I have two questions actually. The first one is, it seems like a lot of your typographic choices are based on like a solid understanding of the history of typefaces and a lot of things around that. So I was wondering, what's one of your favorite ways to continue to learn about typefaces and just like lettering and typography? And then another one, maybe a little more ambiguous, but what is one thing that you feel like makes a branding project successful that people often don't think about or know about?
Good questions. I think on just to answer the question about like learning about type and being continually kind of curious about that, I think the way that we kind of approach how we bring typography into our work is not necessarily just like picking our favorite typefaces or like eyeing that one typeface that you really want to like force into a project at some point. But again, it's like just understanding who this audience is and what this brand is. And then like once you start to create like a set of constraints within a brand, it kind of is freeing in the sense that you can start to like pinpoint like, okay, how can I have fun in this small little world that I've created? And then within that, you can be like, okay, like let's go for the most extra thing within this tiny little world, because it's going to be appropriate to the world, but still push what that brand is in some way. And I don't know, we're not type designers, which is why we named the talk this, but yeah, we're always like following, you know, type designers and foundries and all those things, and you know, it's just fun to use new fonts all the time.
I think something for me that you know, in terms of branding, and you know, something that people don't often think about is maybe that this might be a hot take, but that the logo is actually not that important at the end of the day. Like it's just a thing that people see and it just exists sometimes. And you know, it doesn't like, sometimes clients are like, oh, it like needs to like say this and this and this, and it's like, not really. Like it doesn't really need to do that. That's what the visual identity is for. That's what the brand voice is for. That's what the visual system is for. But I think sometimes when people think of branding, like especially if you're not well versed in it or if you've never done a branding process before, you're like, yeah, the logo, right? And it's like, not really. Like it's just like such a small piece of what makes up like a good brand identity. And I think honestly, that's part of our job as designers and our job as a brand studio is that educating clients on why that's important and why sometimes the logo itself doesn't have to say every single thing.
I love that. That's such a great answer. Okay, thank you very much to Kristian and Zia for that amazing talk.